Okay, I will mute everybody. Welcome and thanks for joining us. Right now, I will start with the screen sharing and bring up slides that we took. And you're going to have to understand these were taken 24 years ago in 1997 when we went to Greece. So I did not have a gray hair and a gray beard. So if you see somebody in there, you start to wonder who is this person? Well, that could be me in there, on things. So. The area off to the upper left of your screen up here, this is Athens and the harbor of Piraeus. And the little red line shows kind of our trip around the Cyclades Islands, which are these islands right here in the center. And if you were, we'll show later on a map, but over to the east side would be Turkey. To the south of there would be Crete, and then Africa, Egypt, and to the west of there would be Italy. So just to put you in perspective of where you are, and we'll show some more maps just because they're helpful to see what's happening here. But follow that little red line, and that's what we'll be doing on this trip. The group of people that we went with were all Kathleen's relatives. So in the picture are her parents, her cousins, and kind of I'm the black sheep of the
going by sailboat?
No,
okay, whoever's
the itinerary, and they're showing now the Greek islands.
Can we mute her?
I'm sorry.
Okay. So in there you're seeing Kathleen's sister and brother-in-law and her uncle and her mom and her dad and stuff. And the guy in the red shirt is the black sheep of the family. I'm married in to this group. And the trip was planned as part of an outing by the Naples, Florida Yacht Club, where there were a bunch of sailors there. They got together and figured, well, we can go over to Greece and charter sailboats and sail them around the Greek islands. And the trip was interesting in as much as we had like a flotilla of 8 boats going together of Americans that were sailing over there. And I was one of the very few and maybe the only one out of this group that spoke even a little bit of Greek. So that was a big help because we were not in Athens most of the trip. Athens itself is kind of let's face it, kind of a dumpy city in a lot of ways. I mean, there's a lot to not like about Athens, but then you're going along in the traffic and the smog, and there will be these ancient ruins just popping up, like on the traffic island. And they've only been there for 3,500 years, so why take them down? And then you're going along, and there's a stadium, and you realize this is the Olympic Stadium, not an Olympic Stadium, the one. So, from several thousand years ago, and these amphitheaters and other things that you just kind of like walk around and you realize how incredible this city is, in as much as you're right in a major metropolitan area, and then right in it, you're hiking around with this just brilliant culture that has been there for thousands and thousands of years. And this amphitheater that we're in right there, it was one of those places that was acoustically designed. So a person speaking at a normal voice down on the bottom level could be heard all the way at the top level. And it was just one of those technologies that we seem to have lost. There were places, the reason we showed this is a hotel card that we have here. And that, as it turned out, was the hotel. And you'll find things like this in here that you say, well, that doesn't look much like a hotel, but it actually was. And we would have these, very interesting settings with flowers growing all around us and other things nearby. And then you peek out between buildings and there's these magnificent views of ancient buildings going back, again, a couple of thousand years. You see down here on the screen, here's a look at something down here and you're saying, well, what is that? And what is this? And these are ancient buildings from a civilization that, quite frankly, started a lot of the Western world. The whole idea of democracy, the whole idea of citizens not being ruled by somebody else, but in fact, collectively ruling. And so some of these were just astounding. Then you see some later influences that might have come, that this church was built in about 400, the year 400, and beautiful, beautiful settings inside here. And we hiked up to the Acropolis, which means high city, Acropolis, and the Parthenon up here. And who's that dashing couple there, huh? So the sky, the sky was a little smoggy in right there in Athens, and and it may be some contributing factors to the wear and tear on these buildings that we have, but you would also get like dust storms that would blow up from Africa. You would get smog that can blow down from other parts of Europe. And so this is pretty well the crossroads of the earth right there that you're seeing. And just wonderful, interesting things. Everywhere you look, there was some detail that you realize, this person, when they were making this, and, however many, 2,500 years ago, they were just very competent, very skilled, very intelligent people, that worked on these things. And I was sketching. And so there's a fair number of pictures of me with that hat that are going to be in the slideshow that we'd have. But I brought a sketch pad and was just drawing the things as we went along, to get a sense of, the pictures of what we had. And you'd see these, the columns, and then the ones where you actually had a statue figure as part of the column. The Katia did, I think these are called, and wonderful topography around there where you see the kind of the modern city in the way, and then the ancient mountains around there, and other structures like this that would be up here, in the high places. I went on a run and went up in the New Testament. Paul mentions a place called Mars Hill, and I ran up there. And from the top of that, you can look down into the city of Athens. You look down on the Acropolis, down on some spaces like that. So just very interesting, very wonderful places. We went to a museum, saw some of the features that they'd have there. Again, sculpture that was, 1,000 years ahead of the rest of Europe. And this was an interesting picture. And I don't know if you could see that round thing right there. It was the first evidence of a soccer ball. And there's lots of pictures of these guys playing soccer, with the ball, which was, again, a pretty cool invention in and of itself. And so these bas-relief type of pictures here that they have, and then Greece has a long history of playing sports. Then there were also some very bad hats that were, came out of that era that, we're not entirely sure of why you would wear that. But then again, so we left Athens and sailed first to Kea, which is this island here. And it wasn't until we got in our flotilla of boats, that you really, I don't know, you felt like you were leaving the new world and heading to the old world. And going by sailboat was also especially appropriate because you didn't have engine noises. You didn't have any of the sounds that you would have from the modern world. We were in the wind going along, and the boats themselves were pretty good size. They were like 60 foot. So a nice big boat. And of that family group, half was on one boat and half was on another. And then the other people from the Naples Yacht Club were in the other boats. And coming out of the harbor, you see these little kids, and they're on these boats that are maybe as big as a dining room table out there in the middle of the harbor, optimist type boats, and they're racing around and stuff. And as our boat, comes out of the harbor, you'd sail, and we had a captain on each of the boats, the guy, and then they're in the middle, Osta was our captain. This is his wife over here, and another one of the Greek guys. Posta's background, he was a Navy guy. He had been a Navy crewman and a Navy diver. And so the perfect guy, somebody that would really know the islands. And he was along, but one of the really great points about this trip is he assigned a number one on his boat. So somebody else that would do all the actual, manning of the helm, rigging of the sails, doing all that. And he kind of supervised. So it was really great for those of us who wanted to be on board a nice big sailing boat where you need a captain and still get to cruise along and actually do the sailing. This is a temple to Neptune that we just passed. You're just going along doing this. And the watercolor was different. I don't know how else to put it, is when they talk about Aegean blue, it was a truly different color that picked up the sky, I'm sure, picked up the depth of the water, but it was a different shade of blue and just quite beautiful in there. And so they let me sail the boat, and we had Kathleen's uncle was the number one on the other boat. We each had captains telling us if we're going to get into trouble or not, but we did the sailing, we did the rigging, we did all the ins and outs of it, which made for a wonderful experience for us. And you'd pull into Kia, the harbor there, and something that was different. And again, this won't mean anything to people that don't sail, but instead of the boats pulling up parallel to the dock, they would back in. And so you would drop an anchor out there in the harbor and back the boat in and then tie off the lines to the dock. So a lot of boats could stand right next to one another on there. And here you'd see the boats backed in, and you got a lot more boats in these tight Mediterranean harbors. And it was just a really unique thing, kind of like, what a difference from America, in terms of how you even do the sailing. And you come into these harbors, people were actually working there. They were rigging their fishing gear. They were pulling up, cleaning fish. You come into the towns, and they were old and, interesting, narrow streets. And you'd see the beautiful white architecture that would be around. Again, flowers. And I didn't truly feel that I was on vacation until I met this guy. And it was just so different because you realize that there aren't streets, there aren't cars on these smaller islands, but there is transportation. And here's a guy going to work. He's a bricklayer, and he's got this donkey carrying his mortar and his bricks. And you see him here, and truly a local, and the donkey is a local too, I guess, that's there. But they would just, it was just like, oh, you realize you've truly gone back in time. And on the islands, the people did not speak English. So I mentioned, I learned a little Greek, enough that I could ask directions and things, and and how to order food and count, but that was about it. And here's this nice little lady. She goes and is very helpful, but it's all in Greek. So what I'm asking directions, because we're on Kia, there is an ancient carving of a lion. And I'd read about this, and I was asking her, where's the lion? And in Greek, puide Leo, and you're asking, and she gave us directions, and the directions were kind of like, up here is the lion. And we hiked and hiked and hiked and got in, and sure enough, there's the lion of Kia. And you get in closer and you realize that's his head, that's his tail, that's me right there. So you can get a sense of the scale of what we're looking at. It was a pretty good sized lion that was carved, whatever, 3,900 years ago. And the land is very steep, you see, as it goes up in here, and the people have cut flat areas in it, or terraces, that are on all these islands going along in here. I might come back to that, but you see how terraced all this land is in here. It's just to have something flat to grow food on. So very, very different from, the New World. Here's the lion kind of up close, that you see him, and, carved out of a giant chunk of rock there, so anyway, the Lion of Kia. And up in here, you see some more of that terracing as you go along, but notice how steep everything is. And the rainfall, to put it in perspective, Houston gets like 80 inches of rain a year. Dallas gets 38 inches of rain a year. These islands get 20 inches of rain a year. And that almost all of that falls in like January and February. So the rainfall count in June, July, August is 0. So, but that's a pretty good time of year to go to the beach too. So we were there the last week of May and the first 2 weeks of June. That's when we were doing this trip. Just a guy out making a dry flower arrangement. You see kind of the, artwork in the details that they have around. And, you're in again, these ancient, every building was just ancient. And to me, it was not only worth sketching, worth writing about, and just, trying to picture what it was like when this area was in its heyday, when it was really at its peak. And a very interesting place. Here I am looking down on a harbor, and you see the cruise ships, and you also see, the much smaller boats that are in. Okay, this was Mykonos, this harbor here. Kathleen's helping me with. We had some that you'd see, another classic thing to look at, the blue dome and the white architecture. And when we get to one of the islands, we'll see a different little color change on that. But a lot of that white and blue. And when you didn't see the white and blue, people would pull out their camera and stop and take a picture of it. It was any other colors in here. Just pretty details. There's a tiny little church. And all these churches, you'd see some little bitty church up on top of some hill. And the stories were that this was a fisherman who built this. And, caught out in the storm at sea, and he's praying, God, just get me out of the storm, I'll build you a church. So they did, and built the smallest church you could build, too. So, but a lot of what we would be doing during the day is sailing along. You see these rocky coasts like this, meaning it drops off straight down, just like that, down deep into the ocean. And you'd find like little wild goats living up in those hillsides that you see them as you go by, and, goats and rabbits. And here's, these ancient buildings in these towns. I love this picture because of the glare on the surface of the water. But you'd have wind that would pop up. And sometimes during the day, we were there, as I said, May and June. A month later, July and August, they have strong winds that come in, and they have a name, the Meltemi. The Meltemi winds would come in, and it would be blowing 45 miles an hour all the time for 2 months. So you'd have to think about it when you're vacationing. Well, gee, if I go in May and June, maybe it's a little cool still. Should I come in July and August? Well, maybe, but it's going to be windy, really windy. So any thoughts about taking a boat out, they don't even allow that. When they measure the wind speed in Beauforts, which is 5 knots, a Beaufort, and if you get above 7 Beauforts, the insurance doesn't cover your boat anymore. So they'd be very careful when they're taking it out. And the way that the Greeks would pronounce Beaufort, which is an English word, it'd be buffos. So it's blowing 5 buffos, meaning it would be blowing 5 times 5 knots, or close to like 30 miles an hour wind. And if it got to 7 buffos, they'd tell you had to stay in. So, but when you'd pull into these little harbors in Seraphos or Paros or Chios, you'd find right here on the harbor, they'd set up their restaurants. Now, again, they don't eat at the same time as Americans do. Like 10 o'clock at night, this place is hopping. I mean, everybody's out there at 10 o'clock at night, which is kind of late. And we were always the first people sitting down to dinner and, feeding everybody, which the Greek restaurateurs kind of liked, get these Americans fed and out of here before the real people show up. But you can see how the boats pull right up to the pier, and you get off and you have dinner. And the dinner could be something interesting like lobster and spaghetti. So, I mean, things, that you might not get in the States, but very neat food. And then you get the restaurant worker who's showing off. He picks up a table with his teeth and is walking around the restaurant with it. Don't try this at home. It is one of those things that we were like, what's going on here? And here's the owner of the restaurant, and he looks like the owner of a Greek restaurant, I would say, clapping along with this, and they're singing some songs or whatever. And here's Kathleen's parents dancing to the songs that they're singing. And their 50th wedding anniversary. And here we are, got the Congo line or whatever it is that you'd have in Greece, and everyone's doing that too. So everyone's got, things tended to spontaneously break into a lot of fun. So it was just like, it was a pretty cool group of people and pretty fun place to go on a trip together. And you'd see, again, a lot of outdoor dining, and a lot of things that, made you want to be outdoors. This is on Mykonos, and Mykonos is one of those islands where the big cruise ships do go. It's got a big, deep harbor, and it's pretty touristy and a lot of shopping and stuff, but pretty neat to see that Holland isn't the only place with windmills. And you'd go walking around in these, in Mykonos, there's lots of gardens everywhere. And again, the very, very narrow streets that don't lend themselves to car traffic, as you can imagine. And some of this the towns were built like this, up on the top of an island, and with very, very narrow streets. And the reason, when I asked about why they built it like this, they said pirates. The Phoenicians were professional pirates. That was what they did. And the Greeks also had some of their people kind of wayward go out, and they took into piracy too. And if you were trying to defend your town, narrow streets that you could throw things down on the attackers worked pretty well. And so you're going to find one place after another where their architecture was defined by their enemies. And the pirates were the big thing that persisted from really early on, as early as people could get into the trading on ships, all the way up to, pretty much the present. And you'll notice, again, many of the buildings, the oldest ones, are up at the tops of the hills. Now, this is a picture from Delos. Delos is the center island in the Cyclades Islands, and it was the sacred island. Little bitty island had 25,000 people packed into it. And it's near Mykonos. It's a boat ride over. And it's one of those islands that truly is, an archaeological find. In fact, we were on this trip for several weeks, and we were only on Delos for one day. I could have stayed on Delos for a full week. It was just that interesting. Everything you came upon, you realize this is where the very, very high-end, upper end of the people that were in the trading business lived. They wanted to be right in the center. They somehow got really good PR people that said, oh, this is the island that Apollo built. And so it's a really good island, and it's the place to be. Well, they did manage to convey that by, but as you see in the structures and the building on this, that although this island was occupied for some 6,000 years, it is one of the ones where they had very, very interesting and tight requirements on what was done there. For example, they have a water system that goes underneath and that would tend to supply fresh water on one level, and then underneath it would drain the sewage out of the city on another. And much of this was done with the tides. Very sophisticated, you kind of way ahead of their time in terms of what they were doing. And you see many beautiful structures around there, but you realize these were homes. These were where the people lived. And to have, if you picture this on a map, this would be just a couple miles, maybe 2 miles by 1 mile, the whole place. And okay. And any of the new structures are just where they have museum facilities and things. But this was a theater building, and all, very, very neatly detailed and stuff. One thing that was really fun, Kathleen's brother took a drachma coin, which was like about $2.45. And he got out some coordinates, and he found one of these rocks, and he hid the drachma in that coin. So we've got reason to go back to find, the raiders of the lost drachma. So we've got a reason to go back and find that coin someday. But you'd see in here, here's kind of a view that would be the upper level and then the down, and it would lead down to the water system down below. But just a tremendously interesting place. And we're hiking around there, and Kathleen finds a piece of pottery with like the stuff on it. And, we're like, what do we do with this thing? And it turned out that one was Roman. So it was brand new. I mean, the Romans, they were only there 2,000 years ago. So, some new stuff like that. But Delos, if you ever get a chance, it was just truly a remarkable place. And yeah, and you do buy tickets to it. You do need a reservation, but a lot of things in here that you're seeing, were just things, across. You don't see this very well over there, but that other island over there across from it is Rhinius. And with a tight population crammed in, if anyone got sick, they'd take them across the water to Rhinius until they got well or didn't come back. And if you when women were having babies, they were all born in Rhenius, then they would come back because they just didn't want anything in Delos that could possibly lead to some sort of the Delos pandemic. They never had one, as far as we know. Interestingly enough, when we looked across here, one of the things we saw was that had come ashore at Rhenius was a dead pilot whale. Like he knew which island to go to. So, and again, you're just seeing some of the ancient parts of it. Again, all this was built up. Again, there were 25,000, of the highest end of the top of the commercial businesses of all of Greece, all of the Mediterranean, living right here in Delos. This is a great shot of the lions that they have as you come in, and you come down this central corridor. It's called the Terrace of the Lions, and they were all lined up here. And more of the water system, which, again, some things really grab your attention, and that one did for me. And you can see in here more of what this is like, to walk around. And there's me in a 3,000-year-old bathtub. Get to, the oldest bathtub I've ever sat in, maybe ever will. And here's a view back across from their highest point. We hiked around up in here, highest point, looking back at Mykonos on the other side over there. And so they limit the number of people that can come over each day. They limit, what you can do there. The only people there are kind of park rangers that they have. So here we're back on Mykonos, and we leave from here and go down to Seraphos, an island, and you see kind of how the people are living. Look out again how steep the sides of that hillside are, coming right down to the water. But beautiful, interesting architecture. Oh, and the restaurants. So the restaurants go and they just come out and say, no, come into my restaurant, come eat here. And there's a guy coming out doing that. So we go into this one, and he has all of his written in English, which is pretty advanced, but go into this one, and with the group that I'm with, I'm the only one that speaks any Greek. And they said, okay, Jack, order for us. And I asked them, what do you have? And, because they would often have a special. And they said, we have chicken. I said, okay, well, we'll have chicken and a salad and souvlaki. And the guy looks at me and says, we have chicken. And you realize there was no salad, there was no souvlaki, there was chicken, and that's what we had. So you see a little, graveyard up on top of an island, looking down at the water. Oh, this is a good one. So the guys on the left side of the picture are the Greeks, and the guys on the right side of the picture are the Americans. And you see my hat, famous hat here, and there's the volleyball. Well, I could count, but only to 10. And you realize pretty soon the Greeks are cheating on the score. And of course, this was to buy the beer, and so we had to redouble our efforts just because we weren't sure if they were changing the score or whatever at all. And so we kept 2 scores, one in English and one in Greek, just to keep from having to buy beer for everybody. Here we are looking down on one of the many beaches. A lot of these beaches would have shade trees in them and stuff, and they were just beautiful places to go walking along. Classic picture here, the white and the mountains behind it. And then looking down, again, everywhere you went for a hike, you found yourself looking down because you hiked almost straight up. And there's a cruise ship down there, that you see, a full-size one, a little harbor down below. And this little guy poking his head out of the doorway, if you can see him, is a donkey, and one of the main transportation points of the island. Churches, blue domes, sailing into the sunset. And here we are under full sail. And you got a sense, although we were traveling, I don't know, 30 miles between islands and all, you were really only going about 4 or 5 knots speed. So, you would have 5, 6 hours of sailing every day that you'd be going out just to hop from one island to the next. So it was, it moved along. But it was a lot of sightseeing just doing this. And you'd get to some new town and this was interesting seeing, because the cars don't fit on those little streets, these little Vespa motorcycles do. So there were plenty of Vespas, plenty of bicycles, and you could rent them and drive around. And just some cool scene. There's if you can see the people at the base of this church right here going on. And, this was, I think, in Terrace, one of the islands, but just, beautiful places, little tavernas, you see though how much the water means to everybody and the animals and stuff. And here's, another place where the boats are pulled up to. More of the beach. Pretty shots like that too, though, because you get up and the blueness of everything was just blue and white over and over again. It was just stunning. I mean, it was just tremendous colors like that. And then when you'd have a sunset, it would really show up, and you see all the reflected light onto the white buildings and things, how pretty all that is, and how everything showed up in here. And if I had to take one picture and say, well, you want to know where you are? That one right there, steep mountain, blue domes, white building. And sailing by, you would come by these things and we're like, what is that? And it's like, oh yeah, that's a temple to Minerva. That's a temple to this, temple to that. So we're popped along, we've come down, we're going along, Seraphos, Synphos, Paros, Naxos, we've done Mykonos and Delos over here. We're going to head over this way too, coming up. And here you go, a building that is not just blue and white. And so everybody stopped and took pictures of it. Oh my gosh, a different color than blue and white. And you just see how pretty everything was, at different times. Just that you just really enjoy these views that you'd have. And again, this was a little villa up here, and you see the switchbacks getting up, around these places that you'd have, and these spectacular views. Again, the restaurant right by the water, is kind of one of the things that we point out. This was an interesting little building, although now a hotel villa. It was actually miners' quarters. Like a couple hundred years ago, when the miners were mining whatever, copper or something out of the hillside here, they lived in these little buildings that they've now kind of redone and turned into tourist accommodations. Just very stark in places, very pretty, very, very blue. And you'd see again the streets and the magnificent flowers. I'm going to have to ask Mary what these are, but they're something.
Bougainvillea.
Bougainvillea. Okay, there you go. Well, lots of that. If you need to get your fill of bougainvillea, you've come to the right place. And again, pretty little places. So just in perspective on where we are, we're in this group of islands right here, the Cyclades. There's Crete, there's Egypt right there. There's Italy, there's Turkey. This is the mainland of Greece. So just in this little area here, but that was the center point for all the commerce in the Mediterranean back, in Alexander's days and before that, well before that. Now, this was something that you have to understand. There's a little kid in all of us, especially in sailors. These are water balloons, and that's a funnelator. A funnelator is you take a funnel, you take surgical tubing, you put a water balloon in there, and you shoot it at the other sailboat. You bomb the heck out of your other sailboat. So I brought 2 of these so we could exchange fire across the open seas. And when you're out there, this was one of the ferry boats. And if you notice, the hull of that ship is not in the water. It's a hydrofoil. And the way a hydrofoil works is any boat has got a certain amount of drag on the hull. Well, if a way to minimize the drag and make the boat go faster is minimize the hull. And it would have these stems that would come down into the water and it would rise up on them and go very fast across the surface. And you see these flying dolphins out there. Now, if anyone on the call here is not interested in actually sailing a sailboat, this is the way to go. You could get one of these flying dolphin ferries in Athens, in Terrace, the harbor there, zip out to Kiev, from there go to Seraphos, to Mykonos, to wherever. And this is a very legitimate way to travel, where you just go in ferries between places, and when you get to the place, you get a room there, get a hotel at your point, where you're going to. But these are the dominant form of travel between the islands, because most of the islands are too small to have airports. So this makes a lot of sense to do that. And they're not flat, Kathleen says. So this was a jetty protecting one of the little towns that we're coming to. And I wanted to do a little bit about the food there, because it was so fresh and so delicious, that sheep are a big deal there. So you'd have lamb gyros, lamb kebabs, and the dancing sheep here on this. And you'd also have a lot of seafood, like here's some octopus, fresh grilled octopus, many different fresh things, and olive oil with every meal. So very interestingly, no butter. You get bread and no butter, but olive oil, yes. And lots of fresh vegetables and things. And this would be kind of this plate setting up here that would show different types of things that you'd eat, and all of it really good and fresh. You had the souvlaki over here, which after a while, I was just like, I could live on souvlaki. I mean, it was that good. It was that, and then spanakopita over here, the spinach pie that we'd have. So very good food, but unadorned. It was really basic. In the course of the 3 weeks we're there, we never had a piece of lettuce. They don't have it. We didn't have peanut butter. They don't have it, but they don't miss it either. But cucumbers and tomatoes and that sort of thing, and other stuff that maybe is easier to grow. This was just a really cool anchorage that you went to, and you see a lot of other boats thought it was a cool anchorage too. But you'd anchor and spend the night, at a place like this. Get up in the morning, go swim, stuff, and I guess that was. That's all, folks. I guess I ended with my picture of the sailing boats right there. So. Oh, Kathleen's wanting me to go back to Delos, where the stove was, and I can. No, I didn't. There we go. So Kathleen's going to tell us about cooking on this stove.
No, well, this was so Delos had a museum. They had a museum. There are like 3 current buildings, and one housed all the archaeologists, and you had a museum, and then you had a gift shop and a little snack bar. That was it. But I just thought that this was fascinating, that this was your stove. And basically, it would work as an oven as well. And the fact that these things survived all that time, I thought was just fascinating. We need to do a kitchen remodel. Maybe we do that.
So I wanted to take questions. I should have asked, is anyone out there interested in a trip like this?
Yeah.
so Mary, put it on the calendar, but it was interesting the time of year we went, where you think, well, July and August should be the best, but I wouldn't have thought it's too windy. And even if you're just at the beach, and it's so windy all the time that you're kind of like, this isn't as much fun, but you could, but to come in like May and June or September would have been, really, really nice.
Okay.
Can we unmute her? How do I do this? I've got somebody that's, okay, I'm going to stop share. I'm going to stop share. Okay. And
Who wants to talk?
Sandra, you have a question?
Yeah, I lived in Greece for over a year, and that wind you're talking about was maybe just on that island,
Or maybe on the
maybe just
it-
the islands.
it-
I lived in the mainland, and it was not windy, and it was really, really hot in the summer. So I would suggest that it's too hot to go, but the wind wasn't the problem at all.
Well, the Cyclades Islands are kind of a different climate center than the mainland. And when they do the weather in Greece, it's by zone, it's like up on the mainland near Macedonia, that side, and then down in the islands. And when the wind has its own name, that's serious, and so the Meltemi, the insurance companies, as I said, if it's blowing 7 buffos or more, your insurance is canceled. They just look up on things that, you had a sailing accident and it was blowing 7.5 buffos. We're not paying off on your claim. And so, I mean, they were very, it was an important thing. And it was very, when you're sailing, well, I don't know how many people sail here, but if you do pay attention to the weather going on around you much more than you would in a motorboat. And so, I mean, it's a big part of your day. You're just tracking what's going on with that.
So I do have something to say about being on the sailboats. So we were part of that group of 8, but we really only saw our other group. I don't know where the other 6 sailboats were. I mean, they sometimes were where we were, but not often. And one of the things that was so nice is that you didn't have to pack and unpack, because we each had our, what's the term for
Cabin.
no, I thought there was a fancy word.
No.
Because it had a cabin, but each cabin had their own bathroom. The fancy name.
A suite.
No, it was a cabin with a head.
Thank you. It was a stateroom.
It was not a stateroom. It was a cabin. It was a piece of a sailboat, jammed in there. But it was like a really nice RV, but on the water. Because it was a 63-foot sailboat. And so we had our own cabin. We never had to unpack. You didn't bring a lot of stuff, but you didn't need a lot. And, you'd be in, your own little space. And this boat actually had room for, the eight tourists plus the captain, and same with the other boats. So very nice. And again, most of our meals, we really ate when we got to the islands. You pull up, you anchor, and then back in and get out, and there'd be a restaurant there. So
it did have a galley, and we'd have breakfast, and we were usually out for lunch, but it did require a lot of walking, and it was usually uphill half of the time. So, that is something that it's like everybody trained for it. If you didn't live in an area with hills, you'd take the stairs.
So that, and the swimming, interestingly, it was pretty cold. The Mediterranean, 1st of June, I didn't know, I mean, but when you're swimming, you didn't just float around in the water. You were really swimming, and very clear water. At one point, I had some swimming goggles, and I dropped them over the side, and didn't mean to, but they fell over the side. And I thought, oh, I'll just swim down and get them. And I started swimming and swimming and swimming. And I mean, I had to be 20 feet down before I got to them. And I was just like, my gosh, it looked like I was right there. So, I mean, when you're in the super clear, the water was as clear as air. And so you're looking down into it, and it was just like you'd see the bottom down there. It could be 50 feet down. It was just, I mean, it was that clear. It was just spectacular, beautiful place. So, no sharks. We didn't see any bad critters, anything like that. So,
Each of the islands all had jewelry stores. It was kind of, almost like they were known for that, and some good values on it, and beautiful Greek designs. So
they also had restaurants, which were good. So that was a nice thing. So any questions about how to put a trip like this together? Yes, Mary?
When I went, I think it was the year 2000 that I went. I went with two friends, and that was before cell phones, and you could really plan your own trip. We had a travel agent, and we told her we didn't want a cruise ship with other Americans. We wanted to live in the islands and use local ferries. And so she put together a trip with somebody in Athens. We had a little tour of Greece. We were there 3 weeks all together, but then we did the ferries between islands. I think we had one flight to an island, the rest were ferries. And riding the local ferries was actually my favorite thing about that whole trip, because one wasn't overnight, so we had a cabin, but the rest of them were on deck, where you were on deck and sailing among the islands during the day. But they were also carrying produce and cows and all sorts of stuff, and the little old ladies in their black shawls, and they were locals. It was local travel. And it was so funny to see them, these ships, the ferries, back up to a dock, and they'd be tying them up on the dock and trying to get these cows off the dock, off the boat that didn't move, and they're trying to push off. It was just hilarious. Everybody get on the back of the boat to watch the unloading of these ferries. It was hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was fun. So we just had somebody that would meet us in each port. They had all the arrangements for us. The rest of the time we were on our own. It was just perfect. We just loved it. They're so gorgeous.
Great. Well, I'm glad you got the ferry experience, because we really didn't. I mean, we'd see them go zipping by, but we were just going 5 miles an hour, and they're going, 30 miles an hour zipping past.
So we like staying in the islands too, where the cruise ships might be coming in and out, but at night they'd all go away, and we'd be there, and we stayed there, and a couple of days in each place, and can walk around the streets and see the things and eat in the restaurants. So it was just like living there for a little while. We loved it. Loved doing it.
Right, Marilyn.
Hi, I was there in 1978.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Elementary school.
Yeah, really a long time ago. We took a tour, a 2-week tour, and my best friend was Greek American, and she and her husband were going over to visit family. So we went at the same time, and on our tour, we had some time off in Athens. So we met up with my friend in Athens, and of course she spoke Greek, and it was really neat. But there were so many things that were just interesting and unique about Greece. And I made some notes here just as they came to mind. One was the driving. Do you remember the way people drove in Athens?
Yeah. And can I give a little short one on that? I get to Athens, and again, we flew from JFK in New York to Rome, to Athens, 24 hours on a plane. And so I get there, and I said, I really want to go for a run. I want to get out and do a little. So I leave all my things at the hotel, the passport, the ID, all this tourist stuff, and I go for a run. Well, I get lost in Athens, and my Greek is pretty bad, and I'm running up, you're just still running and coming up the sidewalk, and you realize the cars would get onto the sidewalk with you. And they're going up there, and just about the time I was like dodging a car, some motorcyclist gets hit by a car, and he's fine, but his motorbike is parts all over the road. And it just turned into a contest of who could yell the loudest at each other. And I was like, this is just wild. I mean, it was mayhem driving. Yeah.
It was crazy. I don't even remember if they had lanes in the road, because it was just,
why bother? Why bother?
just trying to get where they wanted to go. And they drove with their windows down so they could shake their fist out the window and make obscene gestures and yell at the other drivers.
Fortunately, they have very wide sidewalks so that it can accommodate a car in each sidewalk also. That was what blew me away, having the cars on the sidewalks with you driving.
Another thing I remember is the cats in the ports. And I didn't see them in any of your pictures, but when we were at a port, there were cats all over the place. Cats are good luck in Greece, so people feed them. They don't really, I didn't think they had them as pets so much, at least back then, but they were around and everybody fed them. And of course, the fishermen would feed them all the scraps too.
Mary, do you have a cat story?
I do have a cat story. They're all outdoor cafes. And we were sitting when there are cats everywhere, as you said. And my friend said to the owner, she says, "You sure have a lot of cats in Greece?" He says, "Yes, but not very many Mises."
So my daughter goes over on a college trip, and she was, for 10 weeks, they were in Turkey and Greece painting. Doing all types of artwork and stuff. So she's at a restaurant. There's a group of 20 of them there. And they brought the meal, fish, of course, and she gets up for just a second to go do something. And the cat jumps up, gets her fish off her plate, and leaves with it. And everyone was so shocked, they didn't know what to stop it. So she had like bread and water for dinner, and the cat had a pompano or whatever. So.
And another thing I remember is there were a lot of things that were monotonous. Like everywhere we went, we saw broken pottery, broken statues, broken columns. And it's all white marble, pretty much. It was just sort of unique that way. In other countries, it just seems like you have a lot more variety, but they have a lot of earthquakes. Yeah. So, that stuff was broken.
It was great.
And I thought the food got kind of monotonous. It seemed like they were maybe 5 main ingredients, and everything you had was those same things: the phyllo dough, tomatoes, some kind of ground meat, black olives, and cucumbers.
Don't forget fava beans, and tomato sauce.
Some of that, though, like that, things that you'd have, like the lamb with that tzatziki sauce. I love it. I mean, it
was good. It was good, but it did get a little monotonous.
I don't know. I was enjoying it every minute of it. So, but you're right. I mean, it was very basic. Very, very basic.
The cheese was always feta cheese. And I love feta cheese, but I think that was pretty much the only cheese that I remember.
Yeah.
And the buildings, go ahead.
When you're not in the touristy islands and you're living in the towns, there's lots of different foods. You go into a restaurant and every single day they're cooking like your grandma or your mom would cook. So there'd be all different kettles and plates and whatever food, and you just point to what you want, whatever they've cooked that day. So there's Many, many, many. And that's the part I find now hard in North America is that they think Greek food is the tourist food, the souvlaki and what you're describing, but the food very varied, lots of stews and lots of beans and lots of, lamb things and lots of home cooked stuff.
Mhm. And another thing that was interesting was when you shop, there wasn't like a real price on things. You'd have to bargain. And it was fun. It took a little while to get the hang of it, but once we got the hang of it, it was just so much fun. It just seemed almost odd to come back and to the United States and everything is just a set price.
Yeah. Well, it was a really good experience, and I'm kind of in the process of trying to talk my kids into doing a trip like that. I just think how we did it on, any boat, whether it's the ferries or on a sailboat, it was just a really nice way to see the smaller places where the Greeks live, and they have been somewhat separated from the mainland, and we loved that. And the other, I would recommend, if you're thinking about spending all your time in the smaller islands, either bring a friend who's Greek or learn a little Greek, because this was not like it wasn't like going in Athens where half the people spoke English also. It was not like that at all on the islands. It was you were had to have been doing the Berlitz tapes or something a little bit, which turned out to be a really nice thing. And the Greeks were just lovely when it came to, if you tried to even speak a tiny bit of Greek, you were like their best friend. And they would just, they'd really try to help you out and help you with the pronunciation, take you there. That one of those photos there had this little woman who I'm asking some questions to, and she wanted to walk with us all the way to the Lion of Kia, which was like a 3-mile walk. I was like, don't have to do that. But, we really liked it. So Sandra,
we also went to the monasteries. And they were in that one section. I think maybe it's Mycenae, but I'm not sure. But if you've seen some of the James Bond movies, there was one of the James Bond movies where you see those monasteries. They're on these big, I don't know how to describe it, but it's like rocks that come straight up.
Yeah, we went there too.
Kind of like in maybe North Dakota or South Dakota or something. And then the monasteries were up on the top of that. And there wasn't any way to get up there. And that's what the monks wanted. So people would bring them food and I guess water. I'm not sure about the water, but they'd bring them food, and the monks would lower a basket, and then they'd raise the basket up there. So it was pretty hard to get up there. There wasn't any road at that time that went all the way up, but they'd get part of the way there. And then there were some paths that you could walk on. And it was just so unique, the geography, and then the monasteries and all the beautiful mosaics in there, all the walls and ceiling, everything on the inside of those plain white churches was just covered with mosaics.
Well,
And a lot of it was gold. They had little gold mosaic tiles that made up a lot of the background. It's very unique.
Those monasteries you're talking about are in Matera.
Matera, yes, that's it. Thank you.
They have steps up, like 500 steps. Some have like a bridge across, some baskets, some are, I don't know how they got there. Ropes.
One of the things I wanted to mention that you don't come across is, like, when we were sailing, you'd see island after island after island with that terracing in it, these horizontal lines, and you realized every one of those was made by hand. There were no bulldozers making this, and they were making flat places to grow food. And you realize that somebody might have spent their entire lifetime making 100 feet of that. You know, I mean, it's like, how much could you possibly do anyway? You're moving rocks to try to make level spots. And it just kind of, it told you a lot about what it must have been like for the ancient people trying to eke out a living on these islands. Because there was no flat ground. There was hardly any water. There was, I mean, and yet, you know, you're at the crossroads of all the trading routes. And it just really, it really hit me that this would have been a very tough place to live. And the people must have been very tough. I mean, you know, it's like, yeah, I spent all day moving rocks. Okay, I spent the last 30 years moving rocks. You know, it's like, okay, you're gonna be a pretty tough character, you know.
A fun movie to watch is Zorba the Greek, if you've not seen it. It's an oldie, but a goodie. And we saw Shirley Valentine not too long ago too, revisited that one. That's just a pretty one. It's funny.
I was thinking about, you know, how steep all the other islands are except Delos. Delos, it wasn't flat.
Rhodes was not that hilly either. It was more flat.
Well, but I mean, it's like Delos didn't have all I didn't. So it didn't look like its city was built with the narrow streets so that you wouldn't have the robbers going up through it, which I thought was interesting. If it was the crossroads where all the trading took place, it's almost like, you know, there was an unwritten agreement. It's like, okay, this is, you know, where we all can do our business. So we're not going to go and, you know, kill everybody and steal everything. So Delos again was just fascinating, where they had an amphitheater and it was designed, it was really a water collection facility with a cistern underneath. And the houses were built with open courtyard, like open roof, and it had the 2 different floors, and it would have, again, the water was collected under the bottom floor. And there were access where the servants could lower buckets down and bring water up from the cistern to the lovely mosaic areas. So again, if you just want to go to one place there, Delos was phenomenal.
If you like archaeology, they don't have enough archaeologists, the Greeks say. That we, you know, there are so many more sites to go through than they can even get to. So, but what a nice problem to have.
Anyone have any other questions?
No, but I can tell you an interesting archaeology story when I lived there. Back when I lived there, I'd never heard of the marathon run, and got up one morning and there were these men with numbers on their chest running down the main street, and I had no clue what any of this was all about. I lived near Marathon, so they actually do the run from Marathon to Athens. And while I was there was a poor farmer who dug out his back fields and then discovered human bones. So everything had to stop, and the archaeologists had to come in from Athens. And they discovered that the reason we have a marathon run is because the Turks were coming across to attack the Greeks. And one of the soldiers, I guess he was, ran from Marathon all the way to Athens. And that's 23, I don't know what the number is, 23.2 miles, whatever it is. And he died when he got there, but he gave them the message that the bad guys were coming. So in this farmer's field were the bodies from that war. And they were all buried in different ways. So the generals were buried kind of on a horse with their objects around them and maybe a servant with them. And then the lower officers each had a separate grave. And then the regulars were all buried in a bunch all together, all the bodies. And then the servants or whatever were just in pieces, heads, arms, whatever. So there were 4 different kinds of archaeological sites that they found. By now, I'm sure it's a tourist area and you could go see all this. But the poor farmer could never farm again. And I remember my dad took a picture of him with a Polaroid camera and he nearly keeled over. He'd never seen anything like that in his life. It was like magic that a picture of him could come out. Anyway, so yeah, it's a very different kind of life. But this
Yeah.
was quite a while ago though.
Yeah, those were Persians that were invading Athens. Yeah, and for those runners, they said the guy ran from Marathon to Athens, delivered his message, and dropped over dead.
Mhm.
So it's like hard run, but no, great, cool history in that area, and that I've heard they still running that marathon. What a treat that would be to do, to pick one and go do it.
You may want to get out my old slides and look at them. I don't know, slides.
We should do that. have a Greek party. As I said, I'm thinking very hard about how do I convince my kids to go on a sailing trip around the islands and invite me.
One of my kids did go with her husband before they had children, but they went in October and she said it was already really cold already. So just don't wait that late. But we went in May. May was perfect.
Great.
Well, I'm going to just go ahead and kind of end our program part, and then if anyone wants to stay, they can. So thank you all very much, and it will be posted in a week or so on the blog.